The state attorneys are present, all for defense counsel and Mr. Rodgers. State's ready.
Yes, Your Honor.
Defense. Okay, bring them out. Please be seated. I'll ask our jurors again, did you follow my instructions? Not talk about the case among yourselves, with anybody else, or look up any of the people or places involved. Even if you did so inadvertently, now would be the time to raise your hand and let me know. For the record, no jurors lifted their hand. Next witness.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would move into evidence two items. State's exhibit, it's marked as State's Exhibit number 98. It is a two-page report, I guess might be called, from the Digital Forensics Unit by Casey Stout, pertaining to cell phone 727-421-7736.
Show it admitted.
And also at this time, the state would move into evidence through its notice of intent to rely upon certification of business records. The notice of intent was filed. The phone records for 727-412-7736.
Exhibit number.
And it is exhibit number 78.
Sure. Next witness.
At this time, the state calls Taylor Shomaker.
We'll show the two items admitted for the record. If I didn't do this, say that already. Thank you. You want to go?
Could I
see?
just walk out and see, Your Honor?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
Do you need some water, ma'am?
Yes, please.
Okay. There you go.
Yeah.
You're welcome. State.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Shomaker, I want you to state your name for the record, please, okay?
Taylor Morgan Shomaker.
And would you spell your last name, please?
Shomaker.
And do you have any children?
Yes.
And how old is your oldest?
6.
And how old is your youngest?
2.
And I'm going to ask you to try and remember a time that's a little over 4 years ago, in July of 2015, and then maybe August of 2015. So I just want you to take a deep breath, right? At that time, were you living with Jimmy Ray Rodgers?
Yes.
And did you also know a Curtis Wainwright, or Wainwright as you might call him?
Yes.
And did there come a time at the very end of July when Mr. Rodgers went to Florida?
Yes.
And who picked him up to go to Florida?
Curtis?
And did he come back a few days later?
Yes.
And had you gone over to your mom's while he was gone to stay with her, with the kids and you?
Yes.
Sir, I'm going to object to leading the witness.
Overruled.
And did he come and pick you up from your staying with your mom's when he came back?
Yes.
Do you remember what he was wearing when he came back? What kind of shirt he was wearing?
Budweiser t-shirt?
Was that a shirt that he had had before he went to Florida?
No.
And after he picked you up, did you go back to where the two of you lived?
Yes.
And when you went back, had he brought anything back with him?
Yes.
Now, when you walked into your house in the kitchen, did you see what he had brought back?
Yeah. Yes.
Let me just show you what's already in evidence, if I may approach the witness, Your Honor.
You may. Just let counsel know which exhibits you're using.
I am going to. I was trying to pull it. I'm going to use 35C. Show you what's in evidence is 35C. Is this your residence? Is this where you lived?
Yes.
And does this show the kitchen area on it?
Yes.
And can you just point right now to where the kitchen area is on this photo? And was that the area where you saw the items when you came back into the house?
Yes.
Was there, or did you see a white cooler or a black backpack on in the kitchen when you came back?
Yes.
Again, I'm going to object to this continually leading the witness.
I'll sustain the objection on that one. The previous questions, though, don't beg an answer. It's a yes or no question, which doesn't make it leading.
I want to show you what's been introduced into evidence as State's Exhibit number 40 and State's Exhibit 52. Starting with State's Exhibit number 40. What is State's Exhibit number 40? Do you recognize it?
Yeah, that was my ex's.
Was that Mr. Rodgers?
At the time, yeah.
That's what I meant. And when you talked about there was a cooler on the counter when you came in. Was this the cooler?
Yes.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, the state would like to open State's Exhibit number 52.
You may.
Do you recognize this?
Yes. Yes.
What is this?
My backpack.
I'm sorry, I can't hear the witness.
Ma'am,
My
I'll have to ask-
backpack.
I'll ask that you speak up if you can.
Okay.
And was this also, where was this when you came home with Mr. Rodgers that day?
In the kitchen.
Did you look in the white cooler at some point while it was sitting in the kitchen? Did you look inside it?
Not that I remember.
And was there anything in the backpack that was in the kitchen?
Yes.
What was in the backpack?
I don't remember right now.
Do you, give me just a moment, Your Honor.
I believe it was his clothes.
Did you end up talking to police and giving them a statement back in August of 2015, August 25th?
Yes.
And if I were to show you a page from the statement you gave, might it refresh your recollection as to what might have been contained in the backpack?
Yes.
Do you think it might also refresh your recollection as to whether there was anything in the cooler?
Yes.
I approach the witness, Your Honor.
Page?
It's page 5307, discovery of page 11 of the statement.
Okay.
You can look at it and take your time. Just read it to yourself, okay? Did that refresh your recollection, Taylor?
Yeah. Yes.
So, did it refresh it both as to, well, let's start. Did it refresh it as to what was in the white cooler?
Yes.
What was in the white cooler?
The box of gloves, the ball peen hammer, and the dress shoes that he wore.
And what was in the backpack, the black backpack?
The rolled up jumpsuit.
Did he also bring any presents back?
Yeah.
I want to show you what's been introduced into evidence as State's Exhibit number 50 and ask if you recognize it. Do you recognize it?
Yes.
And what was that?
It was a gift he brought back for me.
The day he came back, was that a special day for you and for him?
Yes.
And did you have special information to share with him?
Yes.
What was that information?
That I was pregnant.
And did you tell him that on that day?
Yes.
Now, I want to move forward a little bit. I want to move forward to maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, in July, when 2 detectives, Detectives Down and Levitt, came by where you lived, and knocked on your door. Do you have a pen? You okay? And knocked on your door. Do you remember that day?
Yes.
And when they knocked, was Mr. Rodgers at home at that time, or did he come later?
He came later.
And when, were they there very long? The officers?
I'm sorry, can you start over?
I'm sorry. That day in July, 2 or 3 weeks later, when detectives Down and Levitt came knocking on your door, and Mr. Rodgers wasn't there initially, did Mr. Rodgers arrive while detectives Down and Detective Levitt were still there?
Yes.
And did he speak with them?
Yes.
Now, after the detectives left, can you tell me what happened and what Mr. Rodgers said to you?
He said that we needed to take a ride.
And did he do anything before you got in the car to take a ride?
He took the detective's card off of the counter and did something with it.
And did you know where you were going to be taking a ride when he said that?
No.
Where did you end up going?
First we went down to his work in Doe Run.
And what did you all do in Doe Run?
I sat in the car and he went in and got his phone and put under a water fountain and then crushed it and then got back in the car.
And did he have the pieces of the phone with him when he got back in the car?
Yes.
And then where did you all go?
Headed back towards home.
And while you were heading back, did Mr. Rodgers either request you to do something or do anything with the parts of the phone?
Yes.
And what was that?
To throw him out the window.
And were the phone pieces thrown out the window?
Yes.
Did you all end up taking another car trip later, maybe going to your mother's or another that day or a couple days later, where you took what was in the black backpack? That
was the same day.
And that day, what did you do with what was in the black backpack?
He had told me to throw it out the window into the river on 47, but I was like in shock and my response delayed and I threw it out a little after the bridge.
I want to show you what's been introduced into evidence as gloves.
We have gloves up on the witness stand, yes, I believe.
I want to show you State's Exhibit 51 and ask if you can identify it. And if I might ask the bailiff to hold the box for me while
Sure.
I'm doing this, Your Honor. Thank you very much. I'm showing you State's Exhibit 51. Do you recognize it?
Yes.
And what is that?
It's his jumpsuit.
Is that the jumpsuit you threw out the window that day?
Yes.
Thank you. After this, did you end up having a conversation with Mr. Rodgers when you were in bed?
Yes.
And would you tell us what that conversation was?
I pretty much initiated it. I was pretty much just like, I knew that you had something to do with this, and, I'm sorry. I remember me bringing it up, saying that I knew that he had something to do with it, and he agreed with me. And I asked him if he killed her, and he said yeah. And then I asked him if he shot her with a gun, and he said no. And then I asked him how, and he said with a hammer.
Did that scare you?
Yeah.
You have to say it out loud.
Yes.
Sometime after that, did you end up meeting Wayne Wright and Angie Wright at the Hub Pub with Mr. Rodgers?
Yes.
And was there a time when it was just Mr. Rodgers, Wayne Wright, Mr. Wright, and you on the balcony talking?
Yeah.
And what conversation occurred there?
No, it wasn't a balcony. It was at the table, I think.
Okay, so what conversation occurred at the table?
Wayne was just asking us questions like what the detectives were asking about him.
Objection to, may we approach?
Sure.
Did you tell Mr. Wright?
I do not remember.
Did Mr. Wright hand anything to you or Mr. Rodgers?
Yes.
Objection.
Overruled.
And what did he hand you?
An attorney's card.
Did Mr. Rodgers have a nickname for himself?
Objection, Your Honor. Previous motion to leave.
Have both sides approach. Okay.
Mr. Rodgers have a nickname?
Yes.
And what was that nickname?
Jimmy the Hammer.
Now, were Wayne Wright and Mr. Rodgers friends?
Yes.
What types of things would they do together?
Drink beer. Barbecue. Stuff like that.
Did you and Mr. Rodgers go to the wedding of Wayne Wright and Angie Wright?
Yes.
I want to show you what I've marked for identification as 74F. What is 74F? Do you recognize it?
Yes.
And where was this photograph taken?
At the DeSoto Walters Park.
And was that at the wedding of Mr. Wright and
I'm
Mrs.
sorry, I
Wright?
can't
Yes.
find one of them now.
You can approach. Ross can approach. We don't need everybody.
I think Mr. Rodgers needs to hear what the testimony is.
Well, then I'll instruct the witness to speak up.
Can you speak up louder so they can hear?
Yes.
And where was this?
At Wayne's wedding.
Move to introduce State's Exhibit 74F.
We'll show it admitted.
And are you in this picture?
Yes.
I'm going to hold the picture up like this for the jury. Can you point to where you are in the photograph? What are you wearing?
My black polka dot dress.
And who is standing beside you with the white shirt?
Jimmy.
Permission to publish, Your Honor?
You may.
Now, did you meet Mark Sievers at some of the wedding festivities of Mr. Wright and Mrs. Wright?
Yes.
And did you meet him the night before the actual wedding?
Yes.
And where were you the night before the actual wedding?
Wayne and Angie's trailer in Hillsboro.
And did Mr. Wright and Mr. Sievers, did Wayne Wright and Mark Sievers, did there come a time when they kind of stepped out and had a conversation by themselves?
Yes.
Madam Clerk, if I could have other photos from Exhibit 74, please. I want to show you what's in evidence as State's Exhibit number 74C. Do you recognize some of the people in 74C?
Yes.
Is Mr. Wright in 74C?
Yes.
And is Mark Sievers in 74C?
Yes.
Again, I'm going to hold it up and just ask if you would point to Mr. Wright and point to Mr. Sievers.
Can hardly tell them a different part. Okay. That's right. That's Sievers.
So is Mr. Wright standing right beside Angie Wright?
Yes.
Permission to publish, Your Honor.
You may.
I want to go back for a minute, Ms. Shomaker, and just talk about when you, did there come a time when you took the law enforcement, took, for instance, Detective Downs to show him where you had thrown out that blue jumpsuit?
Yes.
I want to show you what's in evidence as 37A and B. Let me start with 37B. Do you recognize that road in 37B?
Yes.
And what is that road, or where is that road?
It's Highway 47.
And is that in the area where you threw out the blue jumpsuit?
Yes.
Just a moment, Your Honor. Can I have just a moment?
Yes, ma'am.
Rodgers talk to you about making some money from the trip to Florida?
Yes.
And when did he talk to you about making some money from the trip to Florida? Do you remember if it was before he was going to Florida, after he came back from Florida, both? Just that general time frame.
I don't remember.
Did he talk to you about how much money he hoped to make from the trip to Florida?
Yes.
And what did he say he hoped to make from the trip to Florida?
10,000.
And did he tell you who was going to pay him that $10,000?
Not that I remember.
Did he tell you whether anybody else would be getting money from the trip to Florida?
Not that I recall.
When you met at the Hub Pub with, and Wainwright was there and Jimmy Rodgers, did Wainwright ask you not to talk to law enforcement?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Am I supposed to answer?
No,
No,
ma'am.
you just sit there. You're fine. Did Mr. Rodgers tell you how he was supposed to get the $10,000?
Not as I recall right now.
If I were to show you part of your statement, page 37, which is 5333 in Discovery,
I'm sorry,
5 and then 3 threes, yeah, 5333. If I were to show you a page from your statement, do you think that might refresh your recollection?
Possibly.
I'm going to hand you page 37. You can read the entire statement from top to bottom. Part of it has been circled, but please start at the top if you want and read to the bottom, okay? And then when you're done reading, let me know and look up. Ms. Shomaker, did that refresh your recollection as to where he said the money would come from?
Yes.
And where did Mr. Rodgers tell you the money would come from?
It would come from Wayne.
And how was Wayne getting it?
Objection.
How was Wayne getting it? Where was Wayne getting it from?
From Mark, and Mark was getting it from her life insurance policy.
We heard when you started testifying about telling Mr. Rodgers when he came back from Florida that you were pregnant. Did you have that child?
Yes.
And how old is that little girl now?
3.
And was it difficult for you to tell law enforcement what you knew?
Objection.
Overruled.
Yes.
And was it hard for you to tell law enforcement where Mr. Rodgers had thrown the cell phone pieces and the blue overalls?
Yes.
Is it difficult being here today?
Very.
Overruled.
Is law enforcement paying you to come in here and testify?
No.
Sustained.
Did there come a time in 2016 when you called Detective Downs and asked if there was any way there could be some help for you financially?
Yes.
And did there come a time after that when you started to receive a check?
Yes.
And was that in the amount of $400?
Yes.
Do you see Jimmy Ray Rodgers in the courtroom today? You have to say out loud.
Yes.
Shomaker, if you would turn and point to the person that you're identifying as Jimmy Ray Rodgers. Can you tell us something he is wearing?
Red tie.
Your Honor, that is the only red tie at the table. State asks that the record reflect she's identified Jimmy Ray Rodgers.
We'll let the record so reflect.
I tender the witness.
Want to retrieve your statement?
Yes, thank you.
Defense.
Good afternoon, Ms. Shomaker. Is it Shomaker or Shomaker?
Shomaker.
Shomaker, I apologize. You testified your name is Taylor Shomaker. Did you recently change your name?
No.
Oh, you recently got married though, correct?
Yes.
And you testified to your oldest and youngest, but you in fact have 4 children, is that right?
Yes.
This cleared up. Now, you testified that Mr. Rodgers, Jimmy, has a nickname, Jimmy the Hammer, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember talking to me back last November 28th and 26th, 2018, excuse me?
Yes.
Okay. And at that time, you were asked the question, and your response was, not that I recall.
I don't recall that.
You don't recall. Would you like to see your deposition? Would that help you recall?
Sure.
May I approach the witness?
Yes, ma'am.
You can read the whole page if you'd like. I will refer you down to starting at line 19. So when you were asked the question by me, have you ever heard anyone call him Jimmy the Hammer or the Hammer, your response was, not that I recall. Is that correct? Is that a
Yes.
Yes? Thank you. Now I want to talk about, there's been some references to you talking to the police. Would it be fair to say that your first contact with them was on July 18th of 2015 when they came to your house? Is that right?
I'm unsure of the first date.
Well, you were asked by Ms. Ross about the day they came to your house the first time. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay. Do you just not recall the specific date?
Yes.
Does that sound about right? July 18th?
This sounds about right.
And then they came back to your house on August 25th with a search warrant, is that right?
Yeah. Yes.
Date sounds about right. The second time you talked to them?
Yes.
Okay. Between those times, did you call the detectives?
No.
And then, let's see, you were with them when you showed them where the jumpsuit was, correct?
Yes.
Do you recall what time they came to your house that day?
The day that I showed them the jumpsuit?
Yes.
Evening?
The day of the search warrant.
Yeah, I think it was evening.
Or evening? Are you sure or no?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Would 2 o'clock sound right? Or are you just not sure?
I'm unsure.
Okay. So, and do you remember how long they were with you that day?
I do not.
Do you remember them talking to you many times that day?
Yes.
Do you recall them not, well, that's not a good question. They didn't record those conversations, did they?
Not all of them.
Okay. They recorded one about 7:30 at night, is that right?
Yes, that sounds about right.
Okay. And that would have been the first recorded statement or sworn statement that you gave to them.
Yes.
But when they came to your house back in July, did they tell you they thought Jimmy and Wayne were hitmen?
The first time, no.
How about the second time?
The second time, both of them, yes.
Did they, second? Do you recall when they came for the search warrant, there being a lot of people there,
Yes.
and they were all dressed in black?
Multiple.
Do you recall whether you felt scared or they were scary to you?
Yes, I was scared.
Okay. Did they tell you that you need to get someone to look after your kids?
Yes.
Okay, and that's when they first arrived, is that right?
Yes.
And they waited, it was about maybe 30 to 45 minutes until someone came to get your kids, is that right?
Yes.
And then they started questioning you, is that correct?
Sorry. Yes.
And in fact, they told you that both Mr. Rodgers and Mr. Wright were suspects, that they killed Teresa Sievers, is that right?
They told me they were suspects.
Okay. So, and do you recall that they took about an hour or so talking to you there before you got in the police car?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall where you went when you got in the police car?
We went to Washington County Sheriff's Office.
Okay. And they put you in a room?
Yes.
Had they told you that you know, talk to us or you're, you know, we could take your kids away, we could arrest you? They threatened to arrest you?
Not that I recall.
Did they tell you you could lose your kids?
Not that I recall right now.
Okay. I have just a moment, Your Honor.
Yes, ma'am.
You were talking earlier about the night before Mr. and Mrs. Wright's wedding. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay, and you indicated that Mr. Wright and Mr. Sievers had gone off or done something that you saw or you overheard. Is that right?
I did not overhear anything.
Okay. So you saw them go into a room.
For a private conversation, yes.
Okay. And do you know how long they were in there?
I do not recall right now.
Okay. How many people were there for that event prior to the wedding?
I don't know. Say around 10.
Okay. And was the plan that everybody was going to go from there to go out together?
Yes.
Okay. And in fact, Mr. Sievers arrived last. Is that right?
I do not recall.
Okay. And do you recall having to wait for him before you could go out?
Not at this moment.
Okay. And you were drinking that night?
Correct?
Okay. In fact, you were pretty drunk that night, were you not?
Yes, I was.
Your Honor,
Okay.
may I approach?
Yes, ma'am.
Of the pre-wedding party?
I do not.
Now, when you were asked about making some money from the trip to Florida, you don't recall when that conversation was. Is that correct?
Do what?
Do you not understand my question?
No, I didn't. Can you please repeat it?
I can't. You were asked about Mr. Rodgers saying something about making some money from his trip to Florida. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you were asked when that statement was made, before or after or both. And your answer was, I don't recall. Is that correct?
Yes.
But you do recall that he hoped to make $10,000. Is that your correct statement?
Yes.
At another time, do you recall saying that he was going to make money from selling antiques?
Yes.
Okay. And did you, do you recall in another statement at the time of your deposition, or excuse me, talking to the police, you said you didn't know why he was leaving. Is that right? And referring to page 5301.
At that time, my head was all messed up. Everything was happening so fast, and at that time, I did not remember that.
Okay. At which time?
At the time of the law enforcement's recorded statements.
Okay. Well, the first time or the second time or the third time of the recorded statements?
I don't remember.
Object, improper question. Object, counsel testify.
Overruled, she answered she doesn't recall.
So you recall talking to the police in July the first time, correct?
Yeah, the first time. Mhm.
And then you had several unrecorded conversations with them the day of the search warrant, is that correct?
Yes.
And you also gave a recorded statement later in that day. I think I asked you if it was around 7:30.
Yes.
Can you recall that? And then do you recall making two more statements on Friday, August 28th,
I don't remember.
2015? You don't remember?
I don't remember.
Okay. Would it help to see those statements?
Sure. Yes.
All statements, 5297 through 5353.
Object, Your Honor. The question is simply, do you recall a statement of August 28th? If counsel wants to show her the front page of a statement from August
do.
28th, that I have no objection to.
She can look at the entire thing if it's going to refresh her recollection whether she gave it or not. And the minute she realizes she gave it, she can indicate that. And if she doesn't realize she didn't, then
I think the court misunderstood my objection. Ms. George was going to hand her all three statements from the 25th as well as from the 28th. And I was just indicating.
Well, we do one day at a time.
28th.
Okay. Do we just look at the front pages? Do you recognize that? Do you know what that is?
Yeah.
Is that the written version of a statement you made?
Yes.
Okay. And can you tell us the date on that?
Objection improper, refreshing of recollection.
ma'am, if you look at it and it refreshes your recollection as to the date, you can testify to that. Take your time and you can look at the document.
Honestly, I mean, it's there, but I'm not going to say that I remember it on this exact date because I don't.
Okay. But you remember giving,
But yes, I remember giving a statement. Yes.
and
Your Honor, counsel might step back before the next question.
I think the next question is to refresh on the second day. So,
how about this?
Yes, I remember that.
Third one.
Your Honor, may I approach because I do not know
Yes, ma'am, you
what
can
questions
approach.
we're asking.
You can approach, and she's just asking her if this refreshes her recollection. I think we should identify the second document. We already had the first one identified. I think you can tell us what the third one is she's looking at now.
Yeah.
And the second document that you looked at, do you know what date that was taken? What time?
I do not remember the exact date. It was a long time ago.
Refresh your recollection by looking at the date on it?
There's no way I'm going to remember the exact date.
I'm not asking you if you remember the exact date. What is
Has
that?
answered the question.
Sustained.
Do you recall giving that statement?
Yes.
I had asked you previously, and I apologize, I'm not trying to confuse you, but I had a little trouble finding this. Page 98 of the deposition. No. I apologize. When I asked you if the police ever threatened to take away your children, you said you did not recall. Would looking at your deposition help you recall how you answered that question?
Yes.
Objection
May I-
order improper predicate.
Sustained.
Okay. Do you recall, you have now testified that you don't remember them threatening to take away your children, is that right?
No.
Say out loud. Okay. And do you recall giving a deposition back on, in November of 2018?
Yes.
Okay, and you were sworn in to tell the truth like you were today?
Yes.
Okay. And there was a court reporter there as well?
Mhm.
And do you recall at that time when you were asked, did they tell you you were going to, they were going to take your children away from you? Your answer was yes?
I don't remember that, but it's been a while.
Okay. You were asked by the state about receiving money, calling Detective Downs and asking for some assistance. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And was that assistance to help pay your rent?
Yes.
And in fact, from that time, you've been getting $400 a month per month checks? Is that right?
Yes.
And you're still getting them?
Yes.
And it's your understanding that you will keep getting them until this trial is over. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you recall the police telling you that if Mr. Rodgers or Mr. Sievers were let go or found not guilty, you'll stop getting the money?
I do not recall.
I refer to deposition page 20. Would you like to see your deposition to refresh your recollection?
Yes.
Find the right spot. I'll withdraw that question at this time regarding the $400. Okay. So, Do you recall the law enforcement officers talking to you about money they had for witnesses of $55,000?
Faintly, yes.
Okay. And this was prior to you giving any statements, or pretty much right off the bat, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And additionally, you also received money for a deposit and first month rent as well, isn't that true?
Yes.
Do you know how much total you've received so far from Lee County?
I do not.
When did you start getting the $400 a month checks?
I don't remember at this very moment.
Okay. Was it after this happened?
Objections to the form of the question.
Was it after, was it soon after Jimmy came back from Florida and the police had been there?
Yes.
Okay. When you first met Mr. Rodgers, you didn't start necessarily dating right away, is that right?
Yeah. Yes.
How long did you know him before you moved in with him?
A few months.
Well, you were just friends when you moved in?
Yes.
In fact, he helped you out financially, is that correct?
No.
He didn't pay off some bills for you
No.
and let you move in with your children?
He didn't pay any of my bills off, but he let me move in with them.
Did, you were, you were asked about a conversation that you had with Mr. Rodgers in bed one night. Is that right?
Depends what conversation. Well,
What you were
yes.
asked about earlier today? Do you recall the question, or?
Yes.
I'm going to object to the form.
Sustained.
Yeah, let me find it here. Let me talk about the cooler. You identified a white cooler, said that was Jimmy's.
Yeah.
Okay. Did he normally take that to work with him?
I do not remember right now.
Okay. And the backpack, you said that was your backpack.
Yes.
Okay. And that he took it to Florida with him, correct?
Yes.
And he also brought it back from Florida with him. Is that right?
Yes.
Same with the cooler? Took it with him, brought it back.
I never actually seen him leave with the backpack or the cooler. I just seen him come in with them. Well, they were in the kitchen when we got home, and they weren't in there before.
That backpack normally kept in the car that you were driving? back then?
I don't remember.
Had it been in the, did you drive the Kia? Is that right?
Every once in a blue moon.
That's not the car you normally drove?
No.
Okay. What car did you normally drive?
I had a Ford Focus.
And had that backpack been in that Ford Focus?
I don't remember.
Okay. Had it ever been in the Kia?
I don't remember.
And you indicated there were some clothes in the backpack, is that right? Or was that when you were, let you answer that, sorry. Do you recall saying that there was some clothes in there?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Do you know what the clothes were?
I don't remember. I just remember a clothing type material being in there. I couldn't remember at the time.
The rolled up jumpsuit?
Until I seen the jumpsuit. That's when I remembered what was in
So
there.
there was the jumpsuit and other clothing?
No, there's just the jumpsuit in there.
Just the jumpsuit, okay. Had you seen that jumpsuit before?
Yes.
In fact, Mr. Rodgers would wear them for work, correct?
Yeah.
Did he sometimes bring them home with
Yes.
him? To wash them, or
Yes.
did he bring them home to use them for other work? Such
Not
as,
that I know of.
pardon me?
Not that I know of. He only usually wore them when he was working for Tyler.
For Tyler Juliet?
Yes.
And is that JV Contracting?
Yes.
And you were asked about some presents that Mr. Rodgers brought back as well. Do you recall him bringing back a Fort Myers Beach sweatshirt for you, or T-shirt?
Not at this very moment. No, I don't remember.
And how about some shot glasses that he brought back? Do you recall that?
Not this time.
Okay. Do you recall he brought back a little plaque about making memories with your kids?
Yes.
Specifically recall that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you recall looking at some pictures that he had taken while he was gone?
Yeah.
And were those on his phone?
Yes.
And those were pictures from his trip to Florida, correct?
Yes.
When the police came for the search warrant, the first time you gave a recorded statement, and they asked you about what happened a couple weeks ago, and what it was regarding, do you recall what you told them at the time? Just yes or no?
Can you rephrase your answer or your question, please?
Question? Yes, I can. When the police came to do the search warrant at your home on August 25th, or I guess I'll just refer to it as the time when they were there for the search warrant, correct?
Okay.
And when asked if you remembered what they had talked to you about in July. Do you remember your answer?
I do not.
Right. About Wayne murdering Mark's wife?
I do not remember.
I'll refer to your statement. Would it help to refresh your recollection if you saw your statement?
Your Honor, at this point, I would object to the form of the question because I'm confused as to what the question is.
When the witness has indicated she's confused, I've clarified. Ross is confused. To help it.
I believe she said she didn't recall a statement that was made, and counsel wants to refresh her recollection. I don't know with which statement, though. Which statement?
The statement that she gave on the day of the search warrant, discovery page 52, 99, 5299.
You may approach.
So you, 5299, if you would like to revert.
Take your time, ma'am, and once you're done, look up.
I recognize it.
Does that help refresh your recollection as to what you told the detectives?
Sorry, I'm lost.
Okay.
Okay, was your question about the first time they came or with the search warrant?
When they came with the search warrant.
Okay,
And they said, remember when we were here before?
okay.
And your response was? It was regarding your response to them at that time.
Okay. I don't remember what it
You
was.
don't remember saying that?
Saying, I am so confused.
Okay, that's all right. Let's do that. Did you tell the police officers that it was about Wayne murdering Mark's wife?
Yes.
You did tell them that?
Yeah.
Simple.
Better.
You testified that during the when you were having this conversation, with Jimmy, Mr. Rodgers, that he said he used a hammer. Is that right?
Yes.
But at another time, you said they used a hammer. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And do you recall you were asked questions about about that conversation, and you indicated that you...
Objection to the form of the question.
Sustained.
You testified here today that you had a conversation with Mr. Rodgers
Yes.
while you were in bed.
Yes.
You were trying to get information out of him, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Did you pretend to know what you were talking about
Yes.
during the conversation? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So you lied at that time, is that right?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
When you were speaking with Mr. Rodgers the night you were in bed, and you said he used a hammer, correct?
Your Honor, objection
I
has to be
just-
answered.
Overruled, if it'll get us to the next question.
I do not recall right now if it was we or if it was he.
I already asked that question.
Okay, well, I thought that's the question you were trying to get
That
out.
was they or he.
Yeah, well, I don't
But
remember.
you don't recall
I just know it was a
what was
hammer.
said.
No, I don't.
Okay. You don't. I'll strike that. Let's talk about the red Budweiser shirt. You were asked earlier today about Mr. Rodgers wearing it when he came home. Is
Yes.
that correct?
Yes.
And your answer was what?
Yes.
Okay.
Your Honor,
Do you recall giving a statement on August 25th, 2015, to the police about that red T-shirt?
I do not recall it at this very moment.
Would it help to refresh your recollection by looking at that statement as to what you said at the time?
Sure.
Referring to page 5305. Yeah, approach the witness.
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, may we approach for a moment?
Sure.
when Mr. Rodgers came home from Florida, he didn't come home with any additional money or any items, did he, of money or value?
No.
Okay. And he didn't receive anything, to your knowledge, any money later. Is that correct?
No.
No, that's not correct.
No, that is correct. Sorry.
Mr. Rodgers had 2 cell phones that he used at that time. Is that correct?
Yes.
You described one that was broken and thrown out the window. Is that correct?
Yes.
And he had another phone that he would use after that, after one was ruined?
Yes.
And did it have the same phone number?
He just switched his SIM card, I think.
The little card that goes in the phone?
Mm-hmm.
In fact, that same SIM card would go in your phone sometimes. Is that right?
No.
No? Never was in your phone
Not
at
that
all
I
that you
remember.
recall?
No.
You talked about Mr. Rodgers having a child with you, that you were pregnant when he got back from Florida, correct?
Yeah.
What is that child's name?
Malayla,
And how old is she now?
3.
When you moved in with Mr. Rodgers, was he a good dad to your kids?
Very.
Did your other daughter, your daughter Heaven, did she call him daddy?
Objection is irrelevant, Your Honor.
May I approach?
Overruled.
Did she call him daddy?
Yes.
Was he a good provider to your children? And to you?
Yes.
Hard worker?
Yes.
We've seen a picture, Mr. Rodgers, in a T-shirt says number 1, amazing dad, or number 1 dad. Are you familiar with that one?
Yes, we got it for him for Father's Day.
So in addition to speaking with the detectives several times, you've also given several media interviews, is that right?
To what?
Have you spoken, did you speak to Wink News about your involvement in this case?
Yes.
And did you speak to the TV show Dateline,
No.
the TV show 2020?
No.
Okay. And in fact, you've been working with Netflix for quite some time now. Is that correct?
No.
They didn't fly you out to California, you and your now husband?
No.
Did not.
Netflix did not.
Did they pay for you to fly out there to speak with them?
No.
But you did fly out to California, correct?
Yes.
And you have spoken with representatives of Netflix, correct?
No.
You did not speak to them when you were in California?
No.
They've not interviewed you?
No.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to counsel's comments on the podium.
Sustain your objection as to asked and answered. Next question.
If I can just have a moment.
Yes, ma'am.
Who is Lisa Sievers? Do you know who that is?
No.
Okay. Do you recall giving an interview to her?
No.
Okay. Do you recall being asked in your deposition of November 28th, 2018 about people who have contacted you for interviews?
Yes.
Okay. And do you recall your answers at that time?
I do not recall.
Okay. May I approach the witness? Deposition page
Okay.
31.
Are we refreshing recollection? I may just,
I'm assuming, since she said she didn't recall.
The name's wrong.
So what is the name? Do you not recall that conversation here?
Yeah, but the name's wrong.
Okay. What did the name? What was the name of the person?
Lisa Heslov? I think so.
Okay. And who is she?
Lisa Heslov?
Okay. And she interviewed you?
Yes.
And in California?
Yes.
And she flew you out there, isn't that correct?
Yes.
Put you up in a hotel.
Yes.
Do you know with whom she's affiliated?
No.
And she flew you and Mr. James out, is that right?
Yes.
And you were there for a couple days.
Yes.
Do you recall? So Ms. Heslov is with a docu-series that's being made, is that correct?
Yes.
Do we have a question?
I'm conferring with my client, Your Honor.
Okay.
I have no further question.
Anything else?
just briefly, Your Honor, just briefly, but when we approach the bench, please.
Sure.
few more questions. When the police came and executed the search warrant at your residence in August, who came and picked up your kids?
My mother and my aunt.
And the police never told, the police didn't take your kids into custody, did they?
No.
And you did not feel, excuse me, you did not feel coerced to make a statement to the police, did you?
No, I did not.
And the payments that Ms. Fitzgeorge was talking about, law enforcement ever asked you to say anything that was false in order to...
Overruled.
Ever ask you to say anything false in order to receive the money?
No.
And when you were living with Mr. Rodgers and he was arrested, how did that affect your income?
I mean, I was pregnant and I couldn't really work, so it affected it greatly.
Had Mr. Rodgers been paying the rent?
Yes.
Had he been paying the food?
Yes. Partly food.
Now, there were some questions that were asked you just a little bit ago about the red T-shirt, and you told law enforcement the first time you met them as well as today, the first time you had a recorded statement, as well as today, that he was wearing a red T-shirt.
Yes.
You also testified earlier that Jimmy's nickname for himself was Jimmy the Hammer. Is that correct?
Yes.
And in your deposition that you gave, those pages 65 to 66, you also talked about Jimmy, and you also talked about that. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
And law enforcement, even in the deposition that you gave back in November, let me withdraw that. You were never told by law enforcement that the money that was coming to you starting at the end of February of 2016, you were never told that that money was contingent on you testifying, were you?
No, I was not.
And in fact, at that deposition, when asked whether that money, if you thought you would continue to get that money forever, what was your answer?
No.
Overruled.
Give me just one moment, Your Honor.
Yes, ma'am.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Defense. Is this witness to be released or retained? You're free to go. Thank you, ma'am. We're going to let the jurors take a break. Stretch your legs, use the restroom if you'd like. Please don't talk about the case among yourselves or with anybody else, so we'll be with you shortly. Please be seated. 10 minutes? Okay, we'll be in recess.